Have you checked the children?
Hi, I'm Chucky. Wanna play?
Sometimes that is better.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Horror Show. I'm Cecil Laird.
You got Jaime and Fuego here.
And we are here to do, for the first time in a while, a new movie review. When's the last time we did one of these, Fuego?
Greenland, I think, was the last time we saw something that was in theaters that was like a new kind of thriller, horror.
Well, Godzilla vs. Kong.
Oh, yeah. Derps, dude. I
was trying to think, but we actually did go to the theater for that, too. So, okay. Yep, that would be it.
Yeah, that was the last thing we had as press, if I remember correctly, was Greenland. So
yes, correct.
Yeah.
We did not do this one as press. This one was out our own pockets, and that is, of course, the long-awaited 9th installment. I had to think to make sure it was correct.
Right.
9th installment of the Saw series called Spiral from the Book of Saw. It's an interesting installment, and it's going to be an interesting review for a number of reasons. Just real briefly, this was a movie that was brought to the studio by Chris Rock, if I'm not mistaken. It was an idea that he had to sort of reinvigorate the Saw franchise. He was a fan of the Saw franchise. He had an idea for how to kind of get it going again. And so he brought it, and he was brought on as the main actor, and I'm sure a producer as well, although I didn't double check. But nonetheless, they did a new movie in the Saw franchise that's just called Spiral from the Book of Saw. So it's trying to be its own thing, but, well, and we'll get into it, it is still very beholden to a lot of the, tropes and rules that were set up in the Saw series. So that is a bit of history as to where the movie came from. Now, we've already found out that they are actively developing Saw 10, Saw X. So the question is, will it be a continuation of this Spiral movie? Will it be like a return to the 7 or 8 movie continuity? Because it could be argued that the first 7 were its own thing, and then Jigsaw, it's a part of it, but it's sort of a little bit different. This is the same sort of thing, where it's a part of it, but it's sort of a little bit different. And everyone, or not everyone, but a few people were talking about how, there was a new take on the Saw franchise. Chris Rock had a new take. And I don't know that this necessarily, to me, felt like a new take. So I haven't gotten into my overall thoughts yet because, Fuego, let's get into the specificness of the circumstances surrounding your viewing of this movie before we jump into the overall.
Yeah, so I had only seen the first 2 entries of this film. I don't think I saw the original Saw in theaters, but I remember very distinctly seeing the second one, and the used needle scene disturbed me to no end. And I was like, this whole torture porn thing, and I watched the first Hostel, I think, around the same time. I was like, this subgenre of horror, I don't think it's for me, man. I don't like seeing people in these sort of situations. It bothers me much more so than seeing creatures chomping on people or whatever. So I shied away, and I saw that they basically took over October for what ended up being 7 straight years before that extensive hiatus, and then coming back in 2017 for Jigsaw. But yeah, I decided leading up to this over the last couple of days, I was like, you know what? In case there's something that could be a little Easter egg or an in reference or whatever, I'm going to watch all these fuckers in a row, just in succession. And I did. And, I gained an appreciation for the series. Now, granted, it's not perfect, but I did appreciate the fact that they were very, very beholden to their building mythology and filling in aspects of backstory and some of the time jump aspects that they do with, going back to explain certain viewpoints of things that were happening when other stuff you had seen in previous films. So I really appreciated the way they fleshed things out into this almost like spider web of all of this different intrigue and stuff. And it was almost kind of like Final Destination in the fact that they kept upping the ante of the kills. And you and I were talking about that, before we got on camera. So yeah, I ended up liking it more than I was anticipating. And yes, this declared themselves to be this different spin on Saw, and I guess I'll give it in overall thoughts, but it wasn't that different in that many ways. I mean, you did have Darren Lynn Bousman,
who did what? 2
3, and 4.
2 through 4, right?
Mm-hmm. And then we also had the same screenwriting team that did Jigsaw, Josh Stolberg and Peter Goldfinger. So they did have them come back to at least polish the story with Chris Rock and actually script it out and stuff. So there was still that essence of continuity. I would say the biggest difference for me in this is that it was probably the least Saw movie of all the Saw movies that I've seen, as far as the fact that it focused so much on the police and the detective work and stuff. It really heavily lied on that. And I know that was because you have a star in Chris Rock, and so you want to have him on screen as much as possible. Whereas aside from probably Danny Glover in the original movie, who didn't even have that much to do in the grand scheme of things, you had some kind of forgettable cops aside from like Dina Meyer for me, who I didn't even know was in these Saw movies. I totally forgot, and I'm like, man, she still looked great even all those years after Starship Troopers. But this was even more of a spin-off feel to me than Jigsaw was. Jigsaw was like kind of like a spin-off. This felt total spin-off to me, and there's aspects I wish I could spoil, but I don't want to. The one thing that I will say is do not watch the trailer ahead of seeing this movie if you haven't, because the trailer spoils a couple situations with a couple characters, and you and I have both bemoaned studios doing this, where you see third act stuff in a trailer and you're like, why would you put that in? It's just really aggravating. But overall,
I think we maybe should do a spoiler section at the end of this, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, for a horror series that has 9 entries at this particular point, it's probably worth it. But yeah, overall, I enjoyed it. I did. I thought Rock was good. The supporting cast was solid enough. And while there weren't particularly memorable kills, aside from, I guess the opening one was pretty good. And, there was...
The one that was shown in the trailers?
The one that was shown in the trailer, and that they released, online ahead of time just to remind people. But
that's so dumb. And when it's your strongest death, don't release the fucking scene ahead of time.
Yeah, it was just to bait people, I think, and kind of hey, Saw is back, and you're going to see stuff like this. But I mean, I thought direct-wise, performance-wise, it was a solid Saw film. But I do still probably lean more so towards those ones with the building mythology and this long serialized story like we had with those first 7.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, my overall thoughts are that I enjoy these movies. I've reviewed all of them on the channel. I'm a fan. I'm not someone that's against the torture porn subgenre of horror, and as long as it's done interestingly and well. And I felt like the Saw movies were done interestingly and well, and I felt like they very much honored the history of horror movies with the fact that they would pick up right where the last one would leave off. I feel like that is truly, when you're making a series, I feel like that's almost the horror film equivalent of a salute to the series of the past, where it's like, if you really respect what you're doing as a franchise that you're building in the horror genre, you pick up where the last one left off. You tie things together. You make sure it's one contiguous and contiguous story. You know what I mean? You make sure it all flows like that. And I felt like the first 7 very much had that. And then they felt like they needed to reboot the franchise, which after 7 straight years, I can understand.
Yeah, good.
Now, this one, unfortunately, while the focus of the movie changed, that was basically it. Like, the focus and the victims. Generally, in each Saw movie, there's a specific group of victims that ran afoul of someone that is revealed to be the bad guy at the end. This one was the same thing, but the victims happened to be crooked cops instead of random people. That's not a spoiler, because you find that out in the first 10 minutes of the movie. Is that enough to be different to me? No, it's not. Was the movie different enough to feel like it's a whole new direction for the Saw franchise? No, 100% not. Are the kills good enough to make it a Saw movie? Sure, but I feel like there weren't as many, and they weren't quite as creative as they have been in the past. I mean, I guess you could say they're somewhat creative, and they've used a lot of ideas over the course of 8 previous movies,
and also recycle a lot of ideas over those 8 movies.
True. And then you get to the twist at the end, the reveal, right? That's supposed to be a secret, which, call me a liar if you want, but I figured out who was going to be the bad guy in 20 minutes into the movie.
Yep, I called it with
Immediately.
turned to her, and I was just like, oh, yeah.
There's certain things like that happen that if you're a Saw fan, and again, I'm not spoiling because it's stuff that you can see coming a mile away, unfortunately, or at least in my opinion you could. Ultimately, did this break new ground for me? No. And to ask perhaps the biggest question, which will be a hotter discussion during the acting portion, did Chris Rock pull off the role? Right? Because a lot of people had concerns about whether or not he would be believable as a, hardened detective in this Saw universe. And we'll get to my answer when we get to the acting. But that's my extended overall thoughts. Now, the story, just briefly, is Chris Rock plays a detective that doesn't trust the rest of the force because of a past incident. And he is drawn into a new cycle of violence because jump drives and presents are being sent specifically to him on the force. And the victims are tied to him in some way, shape, or form. So someone, knows what's going on with him. He's trying to figure it out. He's got help from some cops. He's being hindered by other cops. And it wasn't a different enough story. Like, this was literally a detective story we've seen 100 times before, just put in the Saw universe and adding Saw traps. But they didn't spend enough time developing any of the characters to make me care, because there are a lot of similarities to the vibe of Seven in this.
I was thinking that even when I watched the original Saw, that it had some vibes of that, and yet this is the most of that similar vibe, and the fact that it focused so much on the detectives to the first Saw.
But it felt so rushed by comparison. It was police station, crime scene, back to the police station, back to the crime scene, a new crime scene, back to the police station, back to a new crime scene. It never really veered from that, and there were a lot of issues with the way the story played out, being predictable, being the fact that it didn't choose to focus on character development as much as story progression, right? It was all about, here's what happens next, and they go investigate this, and then here's what happens next, and then they go investigate this, and here's what happens next, and they go investigate this. But they never give us that moment from Seven where Brad Pitt and Morgan Freeman and Gwyneth Paltrow all sit down to have dinner and just talk, and we get to know them as characters, which is why we care what is in the box at the end of the movie. You know what I mean? They didn't have any of that in this movie. It was all getting the plot going and continuing on that without developing any relationships or characters along the way, is the way I felt.
Yeah,
so that's how the story hit me. What about you, Fuego?
It was interesting because this is very much with the focus upon corrupt law enforcement. It's a very timely topic, obviously, and I thought it was interesting in the fact that they chose to have a virtuous black cop with a lot of what's going on, and I thought that that was good on their part to at least show that not everybody with that uniform on, or detectives or whatever, is a terrible person, but the fact that they did spotlight that there is a lot of corruption. With power comes corruption a lot of the time. Still, though, with a short runtime, all the Saws have been shorter movies, so yeah, the development wasn't where it wanted to be. And yeah, this isn't the first time that Saw has gone with social hot topics and stuff like that. The sixth movie, having just watched it, they go after insurance companies in the fact that the denying coverage, and how John's character Jigsaw, basically, he had some experimental treatments that he could have sought out, and he's denied his coverage and all that stuff, and he's like the fucking insurance companies. And so yeah, going after those sort of evils, and so this is not the first time that they have explored things of this nature and had some social subtext. That's not to say that they handled it poorly, but I think the execution could have been a little bit better. I did like Chris Rock's character in the way that he was written, at least. I had some issues with his performance and getting a little too comedic at times, but we'll get to that later on, obviously. But yeah, his estrangement from his father, the fact that
and his wife, which
and his wife,
we touched on once, and then never again. He mentioned it once, we see it once, and then it's never addressed again. And it's like, why? Why did we even see it at all? Why was there an entire scene in a car ride about him being bitter about marriage, and then we never developed that at all, really?
And it keeps going too. I mean, even when they're walking through like the subway area and all that, I mean, you know, it was written for some comedic effect, I think, and to try to humanize their newfound relationship and, you know, the disillusionment of having been on the force so long. And he did raise some interesting points about problems with your partner if you're a law enforcement officer and the hours you have to work, and, you know, the high probability of domestic abuse and suicide and all these different things, which are all, you know, there's statistics to show this sort of sad stuff goes on, that it is kind of a thankless job. And maybe that's another reason why so many of these people are on edge in that sort of line of work and stuff. So I don't know, it explored these topics, but it just kind of like danced over them, as opposed to, like you said, giving it the proper time to really simmer with it. It still was very much trying to be this hard-boiled crime investigation sort of situation. And so,
and it frankly wasn't deep enough to be one of those by today's standards.
Not one of the classics, unfortunately. This wasn't Zodiac, you know, this wasn't the aforementioned Seven. It was nothing of that immense degree, and also the fact that so much of the reveal of the villain, as you mentioned, was telegraphed, which was kind of a bummer. And of course, you know, we do return to the Saw trope in pretty much every movie of, oh, this is how it, like the extensive exposition of, you know, oh, well, this was what happened here, and this is why I did this here, and so on, as if we just have to spoon feed it to the audience and the motivations of this person and why certain things transpired. So it was solidly serviceable. I appreciated the built-up mythology. This felt like a one-shot comic book, like using a popular IP and making a one-shot, as opposed to maxi series or
they
mini
sequel baited hard at the end, though.
Oh, of course, especially with Saw X already in development, but there are loose ends at the end of Saw the Final Chapter that they didn't cover in Jigsaw. So will they go back to that timeline of sorts, you know, which Jigsaw kind of fit into as well? Or will they continue this story? I'm not sure.
I think it depends. I think it depends on how this performs.
Box office.
Yeah. So let's get into the acting, since we touched on the story as much as we kind of could. Let's hit the hot topic in the room. But first, let me say, outside of Chris Rock and Samuel L. Jackson, everyone else was serviceable, but there was no one else that was really... It felt like everyone was playing cheapened versions of other characters from other movies. And maybe a few people will get these references, but I feel like the female chief of police was basically a toned-down version of Dr. Cuddy from House. For anyone that watches House, she was the one that ran the hospital, and she was an authoritative badass, but no bullshit, and that's what they were trying to do with this lady, but she didn't quite pull it off. I felt like the rookie was such a stereotypical sort of Michael Pena light from End of Watch. Samuel L. Jackson acquitted himself fine for the little bit of time that we got with him, but
I was gonna say, not too much screen time for him, so don't go in.
Maybe 4 or 5 minutes grand total. But Chris Rock, as much as I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt after the trailers and going into the movie even, and people saying, oh, you need to watch his appearance on that one season of Fargo, I guess maybe season 4 or whatever.
I believe it is, yeah.
But here's the thing. I was really wanting to give him the benefit of the doubt. Sometimes I was okay with him. When he wasn't trying to go over the top, he was fine. But my God, did they lean on him being the funny grizzled detective? Like, I don't know. You can't pull off grizzled detective if you're also the guy making jokes the whole time, even though you're making jokes in an angry way.
Yeah.
And then, you know, that continues through the movie, that whole sort of tone with him. Again, largely he's a comedian, and it almost felt meme-ish, where when a comedian wants to be taken seriously as an actor, here's what they do. They really shrink their eyes, right? They squint a lot. And there's a lot of Chris Rock squinting going on in this movie, dude. A lot of Chris Rock serious squinting. Like,
squinty scowl, man.
Yeah, squinty scowl. And it's like, that does not an actor make. I am sorry. So that is, I'll stop there. But that, unfortunately, as much benefit of the doubt as I wanted to give Chris Rock, didn't pull it off for me.
Yeah, I'm a little more forgiving, I think, but you know, Saw has never really been a series with an extensive amount of humor. I think a lot of their humorous moments were inadvertent, or they came from like over the top black comedy gore like sort of situations, that were just so ridiculous. But this one, like, he was deliberately going for the quips, mother effing, whatever, and talking like a street savvy cop, and
I don't know. He tried to deliver angry FUs, like someone's like, "Hey, F you," and he's like, "No, F you," and it's
that
like
one scene in particular. Yeah.
Come on, oh, this hurts.
Yeah,
This
yeah.
hurts.
I mean, he was good in the third act for me, at least, once everything was really ramping up and he was beginning to realize the stakes of what was going down.
Because they abandoned all the bullshit that they had him doing in the first 2/3.
Yeah, yeah. But so he did at least handle his dramatic chops decently enough when, people he cared about started getting off. So I thought that was good. And but I just don't know, man. I mean, everybody else felt in a lot of ways like everybody else. Even like I could tell Samuel L. Jackson's kind of going through the motions a little bit, man. And since he wasn't in too much of the movie, I guess it didn't really matter as much. But like the entirety of the law enforcement cast in this felt like something I would have seen on like a CSI or any of those Law and Order. Like I don't watch those sort of shows, but I've seen enough of them at like friends' houses or girls I used to date or whatever. And I'm just like, okay, yeah, this felt like TV level, like cop bravado, puff your chest out sort of silliness. And especially the villainous cops that we got here, I didn't really buy into them being as evil, corrupt as they were supposed to be, as they were written and as they actually were. But they just didn't sell it. They didn't asshole it up as much as I really thought they should have to, nail it home and make you just hate their friggin' guts,
Yeah.
But it's always weird when comedians want to veer into this territory, because they do say many comedians have like a dark side to them. And so that's why a Robin Williams can do something like 1 Hour Photo, or that's why Jim Carrey can do something like, I wasn't too big on the number 23, it was okay, but...
I went there too, though.
Yeah, but Eternal Sunshine, I mean, any sort of dramatic lifting in comparison with, being goofy. And I mean, Chris Rock made his name Saturday Night Live, improv, and, stand-up comedy, and, did like smaller roles and then eventually larger roles. Like
he was great in the Lethal Weapon 4.
He was, yeah. He was the comic relief in Lethal Weapon 4, though, so...
License, registration,
yeah.
urine sample. That shit made me laugh.
No, dude, that's up there in my favorites of the franchise. I think 4
is dramatically underappreciated. But okay, so
the acting. I mean, Rock was good, but not great, unfortunately. But he did shine when he went away from his shtick and actually got to flex his chops in the third act, at least for me.
So let's talk about the other aspects of the film, the cinematography, the production design. So here's the thing. I thought the production design was great. I thought all of the set design, the actual design of the production itself was all good stuff. I think there was a lot of issues with the direction and the pacing of the movie. Like, it was this to this to this to this, again, with no breather breaks. And I feel like while the movie kept moving, I feel like it suffered because you didn't take a chance to really get involved with any of the characters, because you kept moving and moving and moving and moving. But I will say it was pretty. I mean, it was filmed nice. It had nice angles that told the story well, but it was the other stuff behind all that I was starting to have issues with. What about for you, Fuego?
It was interesting because having just watched Darren's previous 3 Saw movies, I felt like he took a drastically different directorial approach, because those like 2 through 4 that he did, it was a lot of these like super, super quick edits and like these almost like flash edits where there was like these flashes of light that would hit you. And as he was doing these quick cuts and then like rapid fire cuts, almost like what James Wan did at the end of the first film. I feel like he was trying to emulate Wan's style from the first film, in his 2 through 4 entries. So this was a drastic departure in a lot of ways. As far as the look of this, it was very polished and, great, just angles and everything. But maybe this is more so to the technique that he ironed out with his editing team or whatever. But it felt like, to me, it had a different look. It wasn't quite as rapid fire as those 2000s Saw films that he did.
He did still stick with the speed ramping of the traps parts, though, where...
Oh, yeah, which is just every single Saw movie has pretty much done that.
Jigsaw
Except-
actually had the
Except
least
for maybe
of
the
it.
Spirit Brothers, theirs was the only one that didn't really rely on that too much. So.
Let's talk about the gore.
Yeah.
Because here's
It's
one
still
of the
there.
things that
It's still there.
I still think Saw gets right. I mean, obviously, people call it torture porn for a reason because it is largely dependent on its gore. And I feel like they did a good job with it. I feel like the first kill was definitely the best as far as it goes. I feel like there was a female victim at one point that was tough to watch.
That was that was one that Catherine was squirming in her seat. She was like, "I can't watch this. This is terrible."
Yeah, that was a tough one. Otherwise, in total, I felt a little underwhelmed with the kills and the traps. I felt like they were a little rushed.
Especially the final kind of trap-like finale thing that they did, which has to deal with some puppet string.
Yeah,
I
I feel like, I mean, that was at least kind of different because it tied in with something earlier in the movie.
Yeah, exactly.
But what I feel like is the traps themselves weren't as thematically linked to the victims as they should have been, as they have been in the past.
And
You know what I
that's
mean?
Because all of the victims, we at least got enough of their backstory and why they were there in all of the other Saw movies. We didn't really get much of anything for any of these cops that were getting it in this film. You
Right.
know?
And yeah, we would get little brief flashbacks either during or after they've been offed. And then they changed too how they were presenting it. They led you to believe that you'll see someone get kidnapped and then you'll see them go through the trap, which is what's been de rigueur for the series for the last 6 movies or so. But then they started to get to, people get kidnapped, and then you don't see what happens to them. And I know that happens a few times in the past, but that happened a number of times in this one movie, rather than it just being one time, because, like, at one point a character just disappears from the movie, and like you said, Fuego, at the beginning, if you've watched the trailers, a lot of this got spoiled because you know what happened to that character from watching the trailers alone. They just don't actually tell you that until literally the last 15 minutes of the movie. You're like, no, but you showed this to me in the trailer. Why are you trying to act like it's a surprise in the last reel here? So I think there were some fundamental missteps with this film that made me appreciate it less than I think I was A, hoping, and B, they were hoping.
Yeah, and I didn't go in with like the highest expectations because I knew that this was going to be its own separate thing, and they explored so many different angles with that original 7-film mythology. I mean, even in that, man, in the final chapter where Sean Patrick Flannery's guy is lying about having been captured, I thought that was an interesting angle. I mean, they explored a lot of different unique things in those original films, even if they all weren't that good. They had, just kind of different approaches. This touted itself as having such a different approach, and I don't think it achieved that, at least to the way that it was intending to.
No, I agree. All right, so I think that's going to do it for all of our non-spoilery talk. So we'll do a spoiler section now because I don't want to, frankly, go through the entire movie. So we'll kind of speed run the spoiler section. Spoilers, by the way, guys. Spoilers. From this point forward, we're going to talk about the spoilers for the movie.
Spoiling.
So, yes, we start off with the guy from the trailers that we saw. In one trailer, we saw the aftermath of the subway kill. In the next trailer, we saw the prologue, the preceding, you know what I mean, the before of the guy being trapped on the tracks. And then so we see all of that, the guy getting kidnapped and put on the tracks and demolished by a subway train. I enjoyed that, but I still feel like they cut away. Final Destination would have really reveled in that, and I feel like Saw needs to revel in these things because that's what they're known for. Yeah. So why try and better yourselves the 9th movie in, And
in watching, so I watched all of those first 7 films on HBO Max. They actually have the director's cuts of every one of the Saw movies on HBO Max, and some of them add like 2-3 minutes, but the third one added like 12 more. Third or fourth one added like 12 more minutes, and like the gore factor in all of those was definitely higher than even that opening kill, which might have been the goriest thing that we saw, aside from the finger pulling was pretty gross, you know. Yeah, that
but the female one that I alluded to earlier, even that wasn't super gory per se until the aftermath kind of thing.
Yeah.
This guy gets demolished by a subway train, and then Chris Rock, the detective who doesn't trust anyone in his precinct, is assigned a rookie cop because reasons. Because
buddy cop movie, Lethal Weapon.
Because
any
that's
other
the
film
way
like
of it.
this. Yeah.
Because he's a loose cannon and he needs to be grounded by something.
Yeah. Doesn't like to work with anybody.
Right. So he gets assigned this rookie partner, and they go to try and solve, the case of this subway kill. And they find out that this guy that was killed in the subway was actually a cop. And at the same time, Chris Rock gets a jump drive that he plugs into the rookie's computer, which was funny. It's like, I don't want to fuck up my computer. I was like, yeah, that's a good line. But they, the person in the pig mask talks directly to him, and it's
which
like,
is one thing.
hello, detective, whatever. This is my plan, and blah blah blah. People are going to continue to die. And, blah, 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 blah. So it was like, okay, so it's obviously someone that knows him. It's someone directly around him. So let's watch as people reveal themselves throughout the movie. And
also the first
really
kill
quick.
being, and also the first kill, that cop being a close buddy of Chris Rock's, which was one thing that I found very strange and kind of inconsistent and maybe a plot hole, is the fact that Chris Rock was so well aware of all of these other corrupt officers, but yet his close buddy, he was unaware that he had lied on the witness stand and framed all these people.
not only that, but he doesn't
so
recognize the
intuitive.
giant Fitbit that his close friend must wear all the time.
Yeah.
Like, he's like, this guy wore a Fitbit. It's like, if he's your close friend, you didn't recognize it's the Fitbit that your close friend wears all the time?
Or his wedding ring too.
Yeah.
He said they had hung out so many times. Their kids had played together or whatever, and
So plot hole number one.
Yeah.
But we, so essentially we see at the precinct after this first murder that Chris Rock wants the case, and the chief of police lady, is hesitant to give it to him, of course, because he's too close to it. Damn it. And he's like, no, it was my friend. You got to let me do it. And it establishes that all the other cops in the precinct hate his ass because he turned in a crooked cop, a couple of years ago or something like that. And
former partner of his.
Yeah, former partner. And so none of the cops want to help him, and yet the killer of the movie is sending him all of the clues as to what's going on with the victims, it's a whodunit as to who's going to be the guy that ends up being the person doing all of the kills. And we're in the spoiler section. I figured out right away that it was the rookie partner because of various things, but the biggest thing was about 35 minutes in, he asks to use Chris Rock's phone because he's like, my phone's not working. Can I use yours real quick? And I'm like, that's bullshit. No one ever does that. They just find a charging cord and plug their phone in. Like, no one ever does this. He's going to be the bad guy. And lo and behold, he ends up being the bad guy. Even though they try and misdirect you and act like he gets killed by the killer at one point.
Showing the stripped off flesh.
Yeah, his skin, it has the tattoo of his supposed son's name.
Charlie.
But it's so stupid because they've set up every death that's happened. They've done a flashback showing that person from start to finish dying, basically. And they get to this, supposedly the remains of his new partner showing up. And the flashback only shows the briefest glimpses of someone cutting skin off.
Yeah.
They don't actually show the face. They show the skull underneath as a face is carved away. But that's literally it. And it's like, oh, well, this is obviously not that guy.
Yeah, and it's also the only death where they don't actually show the game, where they don't actually show the whole torture session, can you save yourself sort of thing. Every other major kill in this film, that's your like carnage candy, as people like to say. Yep. But we didn't get it with him, and so that's where I was just like, it's like, really? Are we going to make it that obvious, guys? Like, seriously?
And yes, they did. So,
they did.
Yeah, Fuego, why don't you continue from there?
Yeah, and so, I mean, really, Samuel L. Jackson, Chris Rock's dad, he goes missing. They're supposed to have this meal. They're estranged from each other, as I mentioned earlier in the non-spoiler. So he's like, Dad, we haven't even had dinner together in a year. And he's like, well, come over tonight and we'll have some food. And then when his
talk
dad
about the case.
Yeah, don't end up having that happen. A couple days go by, still hasn't heard from his dad. His dad's the landlord of the building he lives at, still hasn't seen him like at all. Goes into his apartment, looks around, pretty obvious that he's not there. So we know at that point he's obviously been, taken by the killer, even though they didn't show it. And really, it's just, I guess Chris Rock has that brief instance where he tries to get some information from his former partner, the one who killed the innocent citizen, the one that Chris Rock has so much scorn for turning this guy in, and he did time, but he didn't do that much time because he's out and he's teaching AA meetings and living in the basement of the church, and still very standoffish and mad at Chris Rock, and saying, hey, we had this what Order 5 or whatever the hell they called it, where they basically gave the cops an almost like borderline, I guess, vigilante sort of status, and they're like, yeah, murders and rapes went down, but the people were living in fear, and so it basically let the cops go nuts, free range sort of thing. And that, as you find out at the very end, his father, Samuel L. Jackson, was responsible for. But Chris Rock tries to save a few cops, including what she was not the chief, she was the captain, if I remember. Oh,
yeah, you might be right. Well, she replaced the chief, though.
Which is what I thought was weird. But, so anyway, his boss at the precinct, basically, she's one that he tries to save. She's the hot wax kill that we talked about. I actually did like the bit with the glass being shredded and shot at that guy, his former partner.
That was interesting, but what fucking machine does that? What machine? So it's basically it turns glass bottles into shrapnel guns. Like, it's a giant machine where glass bottles are fed into this industrial grinder, and then giant fans fire out of these two holes all of the glass shards. I have no idea what did he call it? He's like, at the old what plant? Because he says it twice. He's like, meet me on text. He's like, meet me at the old blah blah blah, and then he calls the cops at the end. He's like, yeah, I'm at the old blah 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 plant. Anyway, I don't even know if that's the same location, to be honest. But there's some industrial machine that turns glass bottles into shrapnel guns, and it was
maybe part of like recycling glass or something, and then it all gets, I don't know. I don't have a lot of guesses.
Why would it fire glass shards out of the machine? It didn't make sense to me.
It doesn't make sense.
No.
Although one little Easter egg that I thought was amusing is where he's chained to the pipe, and there's the saw right next to it, and they're just like, you can just cut your hand off. And
they bring in a very slow version of the Zepp Overture, where it's like, brrrr,
but then he sees the little hairpin.
And like really slow.
Yeah. But then he sees the hairpin, and he's just like, oh.
Yeah, just a random hairpin laying there, like, oh, okay. And I guess you argue because the guy didn't want him to actually cut his arm off, Yeah. So, yes, it's revealed that it's actually his partner that was supposedly killed by the killer that's doing all of the killing and setting it up, and he just wants, he wants to work with Chris Rock to eliminate all of the corrupt cops, and yet he says in order to do so, you can save your father, even though he considers his father a corrupt cop. So the motivations for the bad guy are all over the place, which is a problem for me. Why he would want to torture Chris Rock when Chris Rock literally puts away the guy that kills his father. So it turns out that whole story where Chris Rock turned in his partner for being crooked is his partner shot a guy that was going to testify against one of his friends. And so he shoots a guy and plants a gun on him, and it turns out that the partner was this guy's son 15 years ago, a little boy. And Chris Rock was like, shh, at the time, because he's like, don't come out. I'm guessing I don't want you, you shouldn't be exposed to all this. But Chris Rock was literally the hero of the situation. He killed the partner who he should have stuck with, and yet the kid grew up over 15 years to have a grudge and want to make Chris Rock's life miserable. It just didn't make sense to me.
Well, there's a lot of motivational plot holes in many of the Saw movies, as I can attest to. Haven't just there's such a weird, like, faulty logic at times, because there is this message of, like, just justice and vindication and whatnot, but it's very murky waters a lot of the time, because they do try to, especially in the later movies, they try to make Jigsaw like almost a virtuous character in what he's doing, and yet his means are just very muddled and bloodied and messed up. So I don't know. I guess it's in line with the series in that regard. One thing I will say, though, is I do in some ways appreciate the fact that they committed to being a full-on spin-off with a copycat killer, because they kind of teased that in Jigsaw, and then turned in the previous film, Jigsaw the film, and they didn't end up doing it. It was very similar to what they did in the back half of those movies, where it was kind of a copycat, but somebody who knew him and had been kind of groomed by him, so to speak. But no, this was somebody who was working completely independently, just reverently looked up to his ethos, being Jigsaw, and tried to emulate a similar approach, and yet had never met him, had no contact whatsoever. So I thought that was at least admirable that they committed to that, even if the execution wasn't as good as I would have liked. Props to them for at least, just following through with doing something completely different in that regard, at least. So yeah, I mean, I don't know what more there is to really spoil, aside from the fact that, like you mentioned earlier, they leave it wide open for a sequel. And I don't know, we didn't have our game over. They still slammed the door, but there wasn't that. I mean, some of those classic lines that we had in many of the previous films, just about all of them, in fact, we didn't have here.
That ending was terrible. We got to talk about it real quick. So basically, yeah, Sam Jackson, it turns out, was kidnapped by the partner and is used as Chris Rock's final test, right?
Yeah.
Somehow, even though he thinks that so the killer thinks that Sam Jackson is guilty, and yet Chris Rock's final test is whether or not he's going to free Sam Jackson instead of chase him. So freeing Sam Jackson is antithetical to his actual goals as the killer, so that didn't make any sense. And
because it was the one bullet thing. He's like, you can either shoot that bullseye thing up there, the spiral, and save your father, or you can shoot me.
But the bullshit is literally...
what happens right after?
What happens right after? He's literally called the SWAT team. It's not like the SWAT team is just comprised of the 6 guys coming up the stairs. He's going to go down that industrial elevator and meet the entire SWAT team waiting outside the building for anyone to come out. Like, they tried to act like, the SWAT team comes in and has Chris Rock held like this, and then they shoot Samuel L. Jackson because he's being puppeted to hold up. He's being puppeted to hold up a shotgun. They completely shred Samuel L. Jackson, and Chris Rock looks over at the bad guy, who shuts this industrial elevator to go down and escape. And they play that like it's the door closing at the end of the first Saw movie, when in fact all Chris Rock has to say is like, the killer's in that elevator. Go down, you'll beat the elevator because it's a slow industrial elevator, and we'll catch this guy, and it's over, lickety split. Like, it was such a silly way to end the movie, in my opinion. Yeah,
and there have been some really cathartic endings to these Saw movies, with people just being locked in these dungeons, basically, and screaming for their lives and no hope whatsoever, and slam the door, and that's it, and you're just chilled to the bone. You're like, shit, that was harsh. This didn't feel that way at all. This felt anticlimactic. I felt like there was a little... Yeah, very stupid. And it felt like there should have been a little bit more as like I felt like the ending was abrupt as opposed to like exclamation point like so many of those other films in the previous entries had been. So and of course, because Chris Rock is just he's gonna be like, yo, I'm an officer, and so one of those guys is gonna recognize him, or he's gonna discuss the situation. How far can homie get in the meantime with all the law enforcement outside? I mean, just what the hell?
Maybe they're planning on Saw 10 having the very beginning being some elaborate thing that he has where he's gonna take it down one floor and then get off and put on a disguise and all this shit. That'll be the whole beginning of the next movie to excuse the shortcoming of the end of this one. But
well, the end of, I think it was the end of 5 where the FBI agent has tracked down the crooked detective dude who becomes our main villain, Pouty Lips or whatever.
Detective Pouty Lips, yeah.
Detective Pouty Lips, yeah. The FBI agent, I believe it's the end of 5, has tracked him down, and he pushes him into that glass box, and he thinks he's got him, and then the glass box like shifts back down, and he like has this like secret escape hatch kind of thing. I'm guessing it's going to be a situation similar to that where he has some sort of back escape exit, but. Just to finish things off, it really makes me wonder if Saw X, once again, is going to just start right where this picked up and, can continue the story, or if they're going to do another one-shot, or if they're going to do something back in the original timeline. I don't know. I would like to see, what happened with the Doctor at the end of the final chapter, because I felt like there was a lot of unfinished business with him, even if he did kind of close the loop, so to speak, with finally killing Pouty Lips. But I don't know. This film, though, I guess if I was to grade it, I would say 3. 3 out of 5. Maybe B-. But
yeah, I'd probably give it like a 5.5 out of 10, maybe.
Yeah. So
there you go, guys. That's gonna do it for our thoughts on Spiral from the Book of Saw. Why don't you let us know what your thoughts are on it in the comments down below if you've seen it. Try and keep it non-spoilery. If you are gonna spoil, please put up a warning saying spoilers incoming so people can, scroll past your comment if they don't want to be spoiled. But yes, thank you very much for watching. Thank you to all of our patrons for supporting the channel directly the way that you do. The link to that is in the description box down below. So if you guys want to tell us movies to review or do commentaries for, that is the way to do it. Until next time, though, I've been Cecil Laird.
And gracias a Jaime en Fuego.
And remember, stay scared.